Racist cop stops black woman in a Rolls-Royce. The owner shocks him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Let us return to the main character. Naomi Carter moved through the late afternoon traffic with steady patience, the kind that comes from long experience rather than convenience. Her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel of a pearl-white Rolls-Royce that glided along the boulevard, as if the road itself had been smoothed just for her. The cabin quiet, insulated from the city's noise. The digital clock glowing a soft amber as it marked the minutes. The speedometer holding firm at 30. 5 miles per hour, well within the posted limit. The air carrying the clean scent of leather and something faintly floral from the streets beyond the tinted glass. Naomi's posture relaxed, her gaze attentive, her breathing calm, as if this drive were nothing more than another line in an ordinary day. Yet the world outside did not see it that way, because attention has a way of following symbols. And few symbols draw more eyes than a Rolls-Royce driven by a black woman in a neighborhood that prides itself on quiet order and assumptions. Assumptions that settled like dust as a patrol car eased into view behind her. Its presence subtle at first, then unmistakable. Naomi noticed the reflection in her rearview mirror, the squared silhouette, the slow matching pace, the unspoken question hanging in the air. She did not flinch, did not accelerate, did not offer a reaction beyond what the law required. She signaled smoothly and pulled to the curb, the engine whispering down to idle. The car stopping with precision inches from the painted line. Pedestrians paused. A cyclist slowed, curiosity blooming in small glances, the moment stretching thin and expectant. Officer Daniel Whitmore stepped out his cruiser with a practiced gait, one hand near his belt, his eyes scanning the scene, as if he were confirming a story he had already written in his mind. The Rolls-Royce gleamed under. The sun, immaculate, almost defiant in its elegance. Whitmore adjusted his sunglasses, his expression settling into a confident mask, the kind worn by men who believe routine favors them. Naomi lowered her window halfway. Not all the way, just enough to speak clearly, the glass humming softly as it descended, her face composed, her voice ready but unhurried. She met his approach with a level look, not challenging, not submissive, simply present, the space between them filled with the hum of traffic and the quiet ticking of a cooling engine. Whitmore leaned slightly, peering in as though searching for confirmation of something unspoken, his tone measured but edged with presumption as he began to speak, asking questions that felt less like procedure and more like inspection. Naomi listened without interruption, her eyes steady, her shoulders relaxed, her silence doing more work than any protest could. Around them the street held its breath, unaware that this brief stop, measured in minutes and yards and miles per hour, was about to become a lesson not in speed or paperwork, but in perception, ownership, and the quiet power of truth waiting patiently for its moment. Officer Whitmore stood beside the lowered window, the late afternoon sun reflecting off his badge as traffic continued to move around them in steady waves, the moment stretching into something heavier than a routine stop, his questions following a familiar pattern: license, registration, destination, each word delivered with a confidence that suggested the answers were already suspected. Naomi Carter responded calmly, her voice even, her movements deliberate as she reached into the center console and produced the requested documents, placing them together without haste, her hands steady, her expression unreadable, the kind of composure that often unsettles those who expect nervousness. Whitmore glanced at the paperwork, his eyes lingering longer than necessary, as if searching for an inconsistency that would justify the unease forming behind his sunglasses. The name Naomi Carter sat clearly on the license, the address neatly printed, the photo unmistakably her. He nodded once, then looked past her toward the interior of the car, his gaze tracing the clean lines of the dashboard, the quiet luxury, the absence of clutter, details that did not match the assumptions he had quietly carried to the curb. He cleared his throat and asked again where she was headed, this time slower, more deliberate. Naomi answered without changing her tone, giving a simple explanation that required no embellishment. The air between them remained controlled but taut, like a wire drawn tight. A few yards away, a man walking his dog slowed, pretending to adjust the leash while watching. A woman waiting at the bus stop shifted her weight, curiosity flickering across her face. Moments like these had a way of attracting an audience without announcement. Whitmore straightened and took a step back, holding the documents as if their weight had changed. He glanced toward his cruiser, then back at Naomi, and asked a question that did not appear on any form, something about ownership, about whether the vehicle belonged to her. The implication sat plainly between them. Naomi met his gaze, her eyes steady, and answered simply that it did. No defensiveness, no sarcasm, just fact. Whitmore paused, the silence extending a few seconds longer than necessary. Long enough for the quiet hum of the engine to fill the space. Long enough for the afternoon to feel suddenly warmer. He nodded again, though uncertainty crept into the motion, and mentioned the car standing out in the neighborhood, his tone framed as casual observation. Naomi listened, aware of the familiar shape of the conversation, the way it circled without naming its core. She had learned over years that some moments required patience more than argument. Whitmore returned to his cruiser with her documents. Leaving Naomi alone with her thoughts, she rested her hands lightly on the wheel and looked ahead, the road stretching forward unchanged. She noticed her reflection in the side mirror, composed, unshaken, the image of someone who understood the situation fully without needing to react to it. Inside the patrol car, Whitmore ran the information, fingers tapping against the keyboard, eyes narrowing slightly as the system returned clean results. Valid registration, no alerts, no flags. The simplicity of it seemed to complicate things further. He glanced back at the Rolls-Royce, at Naomi waiting patiently, the picture no longer fitting neatly into expectation. Minutes passed, measured by the ticking of a dashboard clock and the quiet shifting of bystanders who sensed that something unresolved lingered. When Whitmore finally stepped out again, the confidence he carried earlier had softened at the edges. He approached with a more careful pace, the streets still watching, the moment still unfolding, unaware that what had begun as a stop was slowly transforming into something that would challenge more than procedure. Naomi remained seated as Officer Whitmore approached again. The documents held a little differently now. Not with suspicion, but with caution, his steps slower, more measured, as if the sidewalk itself had changed beneath his boots. He stopped beside the window and returned her license and registration one by one, his fingers lingering a fraction of a second longer than before, the shift subtle but unmistakable. He asked another question, this time about her work, framed casually yet weighted. With curiosity, Naomi answered without hesitation, her words clear and unadorned, offering just enough to satisfy the question without inviting judgment. Whitmore nodded, glancing briefly toward the gathering onlookers, aware of the quiet audience that had formed, the man with the dog now standing still, the woman at the bus stop watching openly, a delivery truck idling nearby, its driver leaning forward. Moments like these had a way of sharpening awareness. Whitmore adjusted his stance and commented on the car again, its value, its presence, his tone attempting neutrality while revealing uncertainty. Naomi listened, her posture unchanged. She had learned long ago that composure could be its own form of authority. She responded with a simple acknowledgement, neither proud nor defensive, the truth stated plainly. Whitmore exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, and asked if she would mind waiting a moment longer. Naomi agreed with a small nod, her gaze steady. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard, noting the passing minutes, time moving forward regardless of the pause imposed upon it. Inside the patrol car, Whitmore made a call, his voice low, careful, choosing his words, his eyes flicking back to Naomi as he spoke. Whatever he was seeking now went beyond routine. The response on the other end took longer than expected, his expression tightening, then easing, then tightening again. When he ended the call, he remained seated for a moment, staring ahead, the assumptions he had carried to the stop now unsettled. Naomi waited, her breathing slow, the interior of the Rolls-Royce a calm counterpoint to the quiet tension outside. She thought of the many times she had been asked to prove what others were rarely questioned about. She did not dwell on resentment, only on patience. Whitmore finally stepped out once more, the sunlight catching the edge of his badge as he approached. This time, he stopped at a respectful distance, not leaning in, not crowding the space. He addressed her by name, correctly pronounced, an intentional choice, and informed her that everything checked out, the words delivered with a tone that suggested more than procedural closure. Naomi met his eyes and thanked him calmly. The exchange simple, professional, yet charged with the awareness that something unspoken had shifted. Whitmore hesitated, then asked one final question, quieter than the rest, about whether she had experienced stops like this before. The question hung between them, less official, more human. Naomi considered it for a brief moment, then answered honestly, saying that she had, and that she handled them the same way every time, with respect and clarity. Whitmore nodded slowly, absorbing the response. The crowd sensed the end approaching. The dog walker resumed his pace. The bus arrived. The delivery truck pulled away. The street beginning to release the moment it had been holding. Whitmore stepped back and gestured that she was free to go, his posture now unmistakably formal. Naomi raised the window, the glass sealing the quiet once more. She signaled and eased the car back into traffic, the Rolls-Royce moving smoothly, unhurried, as if nothing had disrupted its course. In the mirror, she saw Whitmore standing there a moment longer, watching her leave, not with suspicion, but with something closer to reflection. The road opened ahead, the city continuing on, unaware that a small encounter had quietly redrawn the balance of power in a space measured by curbside lines and unspoken assumptions. The drive carried Naomi several blocks away before the tension fully released, the Rolls-Royce merging into traffic with a quiet authority that drew no attention now. The city resuming its ordinary rhythm, as if the stop had been nothing more than a pause in the flow. Yet inside Officer Whitmore's cruiser the moment did not end so easily. He returned to the driver's seat and sat there longer than necessary, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead, replaying the exchange with an unease he could not immediately name. Procedure told him the stop was complete, but something about it lingered, the calm certainty in Naomi Carter's voice, the absence of fear or apology, the way the situation seemed to turn without force or argument, just patience. Whitmore keyed the radio and acknowledged a routine update, his tone steady, but his thoughts were not. He pulled back onto the road and followed his assigned route, passing familiar streets measured in mile markers and crosswalks he had known for years. Yet the surroundings felt slightly altered, as though a lens had shifted. Minutes later, at a red light, he glanced at his notes and the system screen again, confirming what he already knew, nothing out of place, nothing to justify the instinct that had guided his hand earlier. The light turned green, and he drove on. Meanwhile, Naomi continued toward her destination, the afternoon sun angling lower, casting long shadows across storefronts and trees. She maintained a consistent speed, mindful of the limits, mindful of the space she occupied. The city reflected across the hood in clean lines. Her phone vibrated once with a silent notification. She did not check it. She focused on the road ahead, allowing the quiet to settle. She had learned that moments like these did not require reaction. They required resolve. She arrived at a gated entrance several miles away, slowed, and waited as the gate opened smoothly, the car gliding through without interruption. Inside, the environment shifted to manicured lawns and orderly paths, a place designed to suggest permanence and control. She parked briefly, remaining seated, taking a measured breath, aware that the encounter on the road was already becoming something else, not dramatic, not loud, but consequential. Back on patrol, Whitmore received a message from a supervisor requesting a brief check-in, nothing urgent, just routine. He acknowledged and adjusted his route, the radio chatter filling the cabin. As he drove, he passed the same boulevard where the stop had occurred, the curb now empty, the bystanders gone, the moment erased from the physical space. Yet the memory remained. He considered how easily the situation could have escalated if Naomi had responded differently. If impatience had replaced composure, the realization unsettled him, because it meant the power he carried had not been challenged by force, but by restraint. Later that afternoon, paperwork awaited him, standard reports measured in lines and checkboxes. He documented the stops succinctly, neutral language, no embellishment, the facts alone, but as he typed, he paused at the field asking for reason. His fingers hovering, he selected a general category. Aware of its insufficiency, Naomi, in her own time, stepped out of the car and moved through her next obligation with the same calm precision. She had shown roadside. Those around her greeted her with respect. Unaware of the earlier interruption, she did not recount it. She did not need to. The value of the moment lay not in retelling, but in what followed. Evening approached, measured by the gradual cooling of the air and the softening light. Whitmore completed his shift and returned the cruiser, signing out as he always had, yet he carried the weight of the day with him. An awareness that the badge did not grant certainty, only responsibility. The city lights came on, one by one, illuminating streets that held countless unseen stories, among them a simple traffic stop that had quietly revealed how assumptions falter when met with truth, and how power, when unexamined, can be redirected without confrontation, leaving only reflection in its wake. The following morning unfolded with deliberate quiet. Naomi Carter beginning her day before the city fully stirred. The sky pale and steady as she reviewed a slim folder at her kitchen table, documents arranged with careful precision, names, dates, and confirmations aligned the way she preferred. Nothing rushed, nothing overlooked. She closed the folder and set it aside, aware that what had happened the day before was not an isolated moment, but part of a longer pattern she had observed for years. The traffic stop had simply provided another data point, another example of how perception often preceded evidence. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Whitmore arrived at the precinct just after sunrise, the building humming with familiar routines, coffee brewing, lockers opening, radios crackling with updates measured in codes and mile markers. He greeted colleagues as usual, but his focus drifted more than once, his thoughts returning to the calm certainty in Naomi's voice, the clean record that offered no explanation for his initial instinct. As the morning briefing concluded, a supervisor mentioned recent community feedback, emphasizing awareness and discretion. Whitmore listened, the words landing closer to home than before. He returned to his desk and opened a digital log, reviewing stops from the past month. The pattern subtle, yet undeniable, once examined. Neighborhoods, times, assumptions guiding choices that were rarely questioned. Across town, Naomi arrived at a downtown office building, parking with ease. The Rolls-Royce drawing little attention in a space accustomed to quiet authority. She stepped inside and moved through security with a nod. Her presence recognized but not announced. She met briefly with two associates, their conversation measured and focused, references made to recent observations, to interactions that revealed more than they intended. Naomi contributed calmly, offering insight without judgment. The meeting ended without spectacle, but the implications lingered. Back at the precinct, Whitmore was assigned a routine patrol, his route taking him through areas both familiar and newly scrutinized in his mind. He followed procedure carefully, aware now of how easily routine could blur into assumption. Mid-morning, a message arrived requesting documentation related to recent stops for an internal review. Nothing accusatory, simply thorough. Whitmore complied, pulling records and submitting them as requested, the process uneventful yet sobering. Naomi spent her afternoon reviewing additional reports, cross-referencing details, noting consistencies that others might dismiss. She did not rush to conclusions. She never had. Patience remained her most effective tool. She understood that credibility was built through clarity, not confrontation. As the day progressed, the city moved around both of them, measured in traffic lights and scheduled meetings, unaware of the quiet shifts taking place beneath the surface. Whitmore paused at a corner store during his patrol, exchanging a brief word with the clerk, noticing the ease of the interaction, the normalcy of it. He wondered how often such ease was denied without cause. The thought unsettled him. Naomi concluded her workday with a final review, closing the folder she had opened that morning. Satisfied that each piece was in place, she left the office as evening approached, the sky deepening into warmer tones, the drive home smooth and unremarkable, exactly as it should be. Whitmore returned to the precinct at the end of his shift, submitting his cruiser and signing off, the routine unchanged, yet his perspective altered. He walked out into the parking lot and paused briefly, looking back at the building, the badge on his chest reflecting the fading light. He understood now that authority carried weight beyond enforcement. It carried the responsibility to question oneself. Somewhere across the city, Naomi parked and stepped inside her home. The quiet welcoming. She set her keys down and allowed herself a moment of stillness, aware that the seeds planted by a simple traffic stop would grow not through force or accusation, but through careful attention and truth revealed over time. The city settled into night, unaware that its systems, like its streets, were shaped not only by power, but by those patient enough to observe where it faltered. The shift from observation to intention unfolded quietly, measured not in dramatic turns, but in deliberate preparation. Naomi Carter spending the next few days moving through her routines with the same calm precision she always carried. Yet each interaction now held added significance. She reviewed timelines, compared notes, and traced patterns that extended well beyond a single traffic stop. The incident with Officer Whitmore standing out not because it was extreme, but because it was ordinary, a representative moment rather than an exception. She understood that meaningful change rarely came from exposing the loudest wrongdoing, but from illuminating the normalized behavior no one thought to question. Across town, Whitmore found himself navigating his duties with heightened awareness. Each stop, each glance, each decision now accompanied by quiet self-examination. The internal review process progressed methodically, requests for clarification arriving with neutral language. No accusations, just careful inquiry. Whitmore responded fully, aware that transparency mattered more now than defensiveness. He began to recognize how easily confidence could slip into assumption, how often familiarity replaced reflection. One afternoon, during a training session focused on community engagement, a scenario mirrored his recent experience closely enough to catch his attention. The instructor spoke about perception, about how authority was experienced differently depending on who held it and who faced it. Whitmore listened closely, recognizing himself not as a villain, but as a participant in a system shaped by habit. Meanwhile, Naomi attended a closed-door meeting in a quiet office overlooking the city. The discussion focused on accountability, on the importance of addressing issues without spectacle. She spoke sparingly, choosing words that carried weight without force. Her insight grounded in experience rather than theory. Those present listened, aware that her perspective was informed by both observation and authority. Though she did not name it yet, the decision to wait remained intentional. Timing mattered. Back on patrol, Whitmore encountered a familiar stretch of road and slowed briefly, remembering the exact spot where Naomi had pulled over days earlier. The curb looked unremarkable now, but the memory lingered. He realized that the encounter had unsettled him because it challenged an unspoken belief that control equaled correctness. The realization did not bring shame, but responsibility. Later that week, a message arrived instructing Whitmore to attend a brief meeting the following morning. The subject line vague, the tone professional, he acknowledged it without comment, a faint unease settling in. Not fear, but anticipation. Naomi prepared for the same morning with quiet certainty, reviewing final confirmations, ensuring that each detail aligned. She dressed simply, choosing attire that conveyed professionalism without display. The point was not to impress, but to clarify. She left her home early, the city still easing awake, the drive smooth, the Rolls-Royce moving through traffic without drawing notice. She arrived at a municipal building and entered without delay, greeted by staff who recognized her presence and nodded respectfully. The meeting space was modest, intentionally so, designed to keep focus on substance rather than status. Whitmore arrived shortly thereafter, escorted to the same area. He noted Naomi already seated, her posture composed, her expression calm, recognition flickering briefly before he registered her as more than the driver from the roadside. The room settled. Those present took their seats. The atmosphere professional, restrained. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just expectation. Naomi waited until the appropriate moment, then began to speak, not recounting the stop in emotional terms, but presenting it as a case study, a starting point. Whitmore listened, understanding now that the traffic stop had not ended when she drove away. It had simply entered its next phase, one defined not by confrontation, but by clarity. The realization arrived without force, but with unmistakable weight. Authority had been present all along, just unseen, and now, patiently, it was about to be revealed. The room settled into a quiet attentiveness as Naomi Carter continued, her voice steady, her words measured, presenting facts rather than accusations, timelines rather than impressions. She described the roadside encounter as a sequence of decisions influenced by perception, the pauses, the questions asked beyond necessity, the assumptions embedded in tone. She did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize the moment. She allowed the details to speak for themselves. Officer Whitmore sat upright, listening closely, the realization forming that this was not a disciplinary ambush but a mirror. Naomi shifted the focus gently, explaining how such encounters affected trust and efficiency, how time spent on unfounded suspicion diverted attention from genuine need. She referenced broader data, patterns consistent across districts. The room absorbed the implications without interruption. Then Naomi addressed the question that had lingered unspoken since the day of the stop: ownership. She stated plainly that the vehicle was hers, acquired through her own means, registered under her name, maintained through her own resources, not as a boast, but as clarification. The Rolls-Royce had not been a symbol meant to impress. It had simply been transportation. The reaction it provoked, however, revealed more about observers than about her. A subtle shift moved through the room, heads nodding, pens pausing. Whitmore felt the weight of the admission, recalling the question he had asked at the curb, the implication he had carried. Naomi continued, adding context, explaining that her role extended beyond the meeting, beyond the city. She disclosed her position overseeing compliance and standards across multiple departments. Her authority derived from mandate and accountability, not from visibility. She explained why she traveled unannounced, why she preferred to observe without introduction. Systems behaved differently when they believed no one important was watching. The statement landed quietly but decisively. Whitmore understood now why her composure had felt unassailable, why the encounter had seemed to turn without force. Authority had been present from the beginning, unseen by choice. Naomi concluded her presentation by returning to purpose, stating that the goal was not punishment but correction, not exposure but improvement. She emphasized training, reflection, and measurable change. The room remained silent for a moment. Then a senior official acknowledged her points, confirming next steps focused on review and development. Whitmore was invited to speak. He chose his words carefully, acknowledging the stop, acknowledging the assumptions he had carried, acknowledging the lesson without defensiveness. He expressed commitment to applying it forward. Naomi listened, her expression neutral, satisfied not by apology, but by understanding. The meeting concluded without spectacle. No raised voices, no dramatic exits, just clarity established and direction set. Outside, the city moved as it always had, unaware of the quiet recalibration that had occurred within its institutions. Whitmore stepped into the corridor, the badge on his chest feeling no heavier, yet more defined. He understood now that respect was not demanded by authority, it was earned through awareness. Naomi exited moments later, greeted briefly by staff, her presence acknowledged with professionalism. She moved through the building without ceremony, returning to the street where her car waited. The Rolls-Royce stood where she had left it, unremarkable in the flow of the city, She entered and drove away, the road ahead open, the lesson complete not because it had ended, but because it had begun to take hold somewhere behind her. Whitmore returned to duty with a renewed sense of responsibility. The memory of the stop transformed from discomfort into resolve, and in that transformation lay the true shock. Not that the woman in the car owned it, but that she had owned the truth all along, choosing patience over power and letting the system reveal itself. The days that followed, the meeting unfolded with a quiet but unmistakable shift, changes measured not in headlines, but in behavior. Officer Whitmore noticed it first in himself. The way his approach softened without losing clarity, the way questions became more precise and fewer in number, grounded in purpose rather than impulse. During patrol, he found himself slowing at familiar intersections, not out of hesitation, but consideration, aware now of how easily authority could distort perception. If left unchecked, colleagues spoke about updated guidance, about renewed emphasis on documentation and accountability. The tone practical, the intent clear. Whitmore participated fully, understanding that this was not a reprimand but a recalibration. Across the city, Naomi Carter continued her work with the same deliberate pace, reviewing feedback from departments, tracking compliance metrics, noting where adjustments were taking hold. She did not linger on the meeting itself. Its success lay in what followed, not in what had been revealed. She observed reports indicating changes in stop patterns, a narrowing of discretionary actions, a measurable increase in procedural consistency, small shifts, but meaningful ones. She understood progress rarely arrived fully formed. It emerged through sustained attention. Whitmore experienced the impact during a routine afternoon stop weeks later, the driver cooperative, the exchange brief, efficient, respectful. When he returned to his cruiser, he paused, recognizing the difference not in the outcome, but in the absence of tension. The stop had concluded without leaving an imprint, and that absence felt significant. At roll call, supervisors referenced recent evaluations, noting improvements, emphasizing continued focus, the language forward-looking. Whitmore felt a quiet resolve settle in, not pride but alignment. He began mentoring a newer officer, sharing insight drawn not from policy manuals but from experience, emphasizing listening, explaining that confidence did not require suspicion. The conversation candid, grounded. Naomi attended another session in a different jurisdiction, her presence consistent, her message unchanged. Systems responded to observation whether they knew it or not. She reiterated that authority was not diminished by reflection, it was strengthened by it. Participants engaged thoughtfully. The atmosphere constructive. Later, as she drove through the city, the Rolls-Royce once again part of the flow, she passed the stretch of road where the stop had occurred, the memory distant now, contextualized, no longer singular. It had become a reference point, not for grievance, but for growth. Whitmore encountered Naomi again indirectly, her name appearing in a briefing document related to oversight and training. Recognition settled without surprise, the realization complete. The woman from the roadside had never needed to announce herself. Her influence had been present regardless. One evening, after completing his shift, Whitmore stood outside the precinct watching traffic move steadily under streetlights. Cars passing in measured intervals, drivers anonymous, each carrying unseen stories. He considered how easily moments could diverge, how restraint could redirect outcomes. The thought anchored him. Across town, Naomi concluded a long day and returned home, setting aside her work with a sense of completion, not finality. The process would continue, it always did, but the principle had been affirmed. Systems could learn, individuals could adjust. Justice did not always arrive with spectacle. Sometimes it arrived through quiet persistence, measured in changed behavior and restored trust. The city settled into night, its streets illuminated by steady lines of light. Within that calm, the true consequence of the encounter took shape, not as punishment, but as progress, not as confrontation, but as clarity, a reminder that the most powerful form of accountability was not exposure, but transformation, and that the greatest shock was not who owned the car, but who guided the outcome without ever raising her voice. The city moved forward, as cities always did, guided by signals and schedules. Unaware of the quiet recalibration that had taken place beneath its surface, Officer Daniel Whitmore continued his patrols with a steadiness shaped by reflection rather than habit. Each interaction now filtered through an awareness that authority was not a shield but a responsibility. He noticed how often calm led to clarity, how often listening shortened encounters that once lingered unnecessarily. The change was not dramatic, but it was consistent, and consistency, he learned, was where trust began to rebuild. Supervisors observed the difference. Metrics reflected it: fewer discretionary stops, clear documentation, outcomes aligned with purpose. Whitmore accepted the progress without self-praise, understanding that improvement did not erase the past, it honored the future. Naomi Carter observed the same shift from a broader vantage point, reviewing reports that told a story without emotion, patterns tightening, decisions grounded, systems responding to oversight without resistance. She understood that true accountability did not humiliate. It educated, it did not demand submission, it invited alignment. Her role remained quiet by design. Effectiveness did not require recognition, it required persistence. One afternoon, she drove again through the district where the stop had occurred months earlier, the Rolls-Royce, blending into traffic as unremarkably as any other vehicle. No pause this time, no glance from a patrol car, just movement, steady and uninterrupted. The road held no memory of the moment, but the people within the system did. Whitmore crossed paths with Naomi one final time indirectly. Her name mentioned during a departmental briefing on continued standards, the tone respectful, the purpose clear. He recognized the significance without needing ceremony. The lesson had never been about her identity alone. It had been about perception, about how easily assumptions could masquerade as instinct. Later that evening, Whitmore stood at a crosswalk watching pedestrians pass. Faces diverse, destinations unknown. He felt a quiet resolve settle within him. Not because he had been corrected, but because he had been given the opportunity to correct himself. Across town, Naomi concluded her workday and paused briefly before heading inside, the city lights reflecting softly across the hood of her car. She allowed herself a moment of stillness, acknowledging not triumph, but confirmation. Patience had once again proven stronger than confrontation. Truth had moved without force. The outcome had not been punishment or spectacle. It had been understanding. And understanding, she knew, endured. The city settled into night, its streets illuminated by steady lines of light, traffic flowing in measured intervals. Within that calm lay the echo of a simple truth, that justice did not always arrive with sirens or declarations. Sometimes it arrived quietly, carried by those who refused to surrender their dignity, guided by those willing to examine their power, and sustained by the understanding that when authority listens, it learns, and when truth stands firm, it does not need to announce itself. It simply changes the direction of everything that follows.